Well, I'm Shirley Maly, and I have lived in Nebraska all my life. I was born and raised here in Lincoln, a product of Randolph School, Irving Junior High, Lincoln High School, and the University of Nebraska. So, but in the late 50s, when I was first married, we went to the Sandhills and lived in Taylor for 2 years, which was really an eye-opener for a city. They really considered us city slickers. But we really learned a lot, and it's a beautiful country, the Sandhills area. And then lived a year in Milford before coming back to Lincoln. And I have 5 children, and as time went on, there came a point where one became divorced. Though I had been working at home. I worked to put my husband through school, and then I think a lot of women, you just need something to do. So when the kids were in school, I worked again. But there also came a point where everybody left home. And I'm sitting in this big house that was built for 7 people, wondering there must be something more. I had always wanted, I never thought I'd live outside the state of Nebraska. I had friends from Ohio and Massachusetts and whatever, Canada, and they're all saying, "You mean you've lived here all your life?" And seemed horrified. And I really thought, I think it's a wonderful place to live. So that hadn't bothered me, but I always wondered what it must be like to live elsewhere. And one day I was sitting there thinking, I'm tired of owning my own business because you can't do anything. You can't go anywhere because you have to be here to do things, particularly when you're kind of a one-person business. And I pulled out an application that I had sent for several years ago, before this, Peace Corps, and was reading it through. And my son, my youngest son, who was in his late 20s then, he decided to go to college. And he came up and I said, "You know, I think I will apply for Peace Corps." And he said, "I don't know why you didn't do that years ago." And so that sort of just reaffirmed me. And I did apply. I had been taking Spanish at the community college and then the Hispanic Center, and just really having fun with it because we had a wonderful class and great teachers. And because of that, when I filled out the form, I decided I'd prefer to go to Latin America because I thought, oh, I already have the language. But it isn't until you get to a foreign country that you realize, yes, you have a language, but still to really converse with people and have deep philosophical or personal conversations, it takes a little bit more language than I had at that point. But they train you well and then send you off on your assignments, and you're the only person there that speaks English. So your Spanish improves very quickly. So that's sort of the sketch chronologically of where I've lived. In the university, I really went with full intentions of being a physical education major. I like sports. I thought if one is going to teach, that would be a fun thing to teach. You just essentially play all day and stay fit. Well, I went down to register because my degree is a BA in education. And the woman that was my registrar was also turned out to be my advisor because she was with the English department, or with English education. And she pointed out to me, well, this is fine if you want to be a PE major. Now here are the things you will have to take, and one of those have-to-takes was chemistry. Not my best subject. I got a fairly decent grade in it, but it was not my favorite course, probably because as finding the unknowns, I had trouble getting my test tubes clean enough so that they came out right. So I thought, oh dear, I can't do this because my mother is going to expect me to get really good grades since she was paying for my education. And if I didn't have good grades, I'd never get out of the house. So I went back the next day and re-registered as an English and journalism major. I really wanted journalism, but all the way, for a long time I thought I would also enjoy journalism. But Mother didn't think at that point that it was a proper career for a young woman. So the English was okay. So anyway, I have the double major and then a minor in history because I really do like history, and I have since decided it's because I like the stories. Well, I think Nebraska and the plains, the flat lands, I think that just becomes a part of you. For me, I enjoy mountains perhaps to ski and stay 4 or 5 days, but I really like looking out over this immense landscape we have because you really feel like you can see forever. And that's what I honestly like about the plains country. And I've discovered the same thing because I do enjoy sailing, but I have the same feeling when you're on an ocean or a really huge lake. You get out there and you can see forever. I like where the sky comes down to meet the horizon. I think open spaces for me are just very exhilarating. I think that I've always been encouraged by teachers within the Lincoln Public School system. When I was in grade school, I can remember that a friend of mine and I made a newspaper. I don't know if you're probably too young to remember the times where they had kind of a gelatin kind of thing. It was prior to ditto machines, and you would use this indelible ink, and you could make a master. It's all hand-drawn, hand-printed for us for our newspaper, and then you could run off copies from it. And so we were very proud of this, and it was sort of the local gossip among our Girl Scout troop, that sort of thing. So I've enjoyed doing that sort of thing. And I think what writing I did was usually more along journalistic lines, because the minute that I could qualify by taking a journalism course in high school, then I wanted to be on the newspaper staff and was. And the same in college, worked on the Daily Nebraskan. I never really thought about it because I discarded the idea of being a full-time English teacher when I had 2 little girls in one of my classes. It's teaching 9th grade grammar, and I was not really prepared for grammar because most of my courses had been in literature, and our methods course didn't talk really about grammar. And I was heralding back to junior high when I did have 3 years of grammar and diagramming sentences, which I just adored, and all these parts of speech, spelling, all these things. And this is what I was using on my class, and then every Friday they were to write either a book review, an essay, whatever, and I would give them grades on their creativity and then another grade on their grammar and spelling. But I was really trying to make a big point about good grammar will help you along in life. And one of these girls in the front row, they were twins, raised her hand and said, "But Mrs. Maly, my friends understand when I say he don't." And somehow I really didn't know what to tell them. I know there are answers for that, but it was beyond me. So I convinced my mother that for me it would probably be better, since I'd had a job offer, to go on and go into advertising. And so I started my career at Miller and Payne as a copywriter with print and radio, and at that point television was just starting. And sort of went on from there because, but I didn't think of it as much as being a writer as this was just a job. And you responded to your clients or whoever you were writing for. If they wanted something rather pontifical, I tried to pull out my big vocabulary and write that way. But when you're writing radio and it was by the word, that's when I got in the habit of dropping thes and us, which my son, who is really, he likes to do fiction, he's always appalled at how few words, little words, I will put in a sentence. And I think it became a habit because of the word count. Usually feelings. And I find that sometimes you write the feelings, but you really wonder if the feeling you had came across. I think that's a very difficult thing. But also when I was in grade school, I was really in love with Albert Pace and Terhun's books. Those are all primarily collie stories. And another author at the time was Myrna Lockwood. And I remember, I still have a letter from Myrna Lockwood, and I have a picture that they sent me of Grey Dawn, which was one of Terhun's dogs. But that was great fun. She wrote lots of letters, fan mail, and so forth. Now, I tend to have more of a reportorial style. Whatever I'm doing, that's what I write about. If I'm angry at one of my children, I may fill a page and a half in my journal, but it gets it out of my system. When I'm on a trip, when I know I like something, when I look at my trip journal that I've written in, and I have all this detailed description because I just thought it was so wonderful. So, but it is usually more repertorial than, I've never thought of myself as a good analyst. See, I love mystery books, but I don't think I could plot one. Well, now being retired, I have a flexible schedule. After exercise usually gets over in the morning around 10, then I like to feel the day as my own. And that many times that's when I will sit down at the computer for the word processing and write. What I really look for, because I also can do this in the afternoon or the evening, is I usually want at least 2 hours, a block of time, because with no interruptions if possible. Because sometimes you really get carried away and you can always go back and edit. But when you're on a roll, you're really going to keep going. I like present tense. I like action. I like action in art too. So I'm not good on passive construction. I don't use that many ing words if I can help it. And I'm very much aware usually of adverbs, putting an ly on something, or loading it up with adjectives. But I guess of writers that I read that have a similar style, I think, to me, I like Dick Francis, who writes mystery books. But he's very straightforward. He doesn't do a lot of reflecting and all this. You go for the action, and that's what I like. Well, my audiences would be, as I say, when you're working with promotion, you're trying to think, who am I trying to talk to, and you write in that direction. And the same with telling stories. If you're telling stories for little ones, you try to keep them somewhat simple and short, and then they become more complicated with age. But it does depend upon who you're talking to, yeah. If you really want to be a writer, I think everybody should write, if nothing else for their own personal gratification. Because the older you get, the more you realize, because I have by hand, it's not on the computer, I have a book someone gave me of blank pages, and I decided, all right, this will be my memoir. Only what my memoir is really all about is thinking back and thinking, what are all the questions that I think, when I'm not around, that my kids are going to want to know the answers to? like where we lived and that sort of thing, when various ones were born into the family, and some of the things that happened when they were all tiny and they may not remember. And I'm writing about their grandparents the same way, how I grew up and whatever. And I think that that grows on you. There was a point where if you would say, you would ask me if I would do that, I'd think, oh, how boring. But now those things catch up with you. And so no matter who you are, I think that you should write down some of these thoughts and these past experiences. But the main thing about writing is just to dive in and do it. There's, to a certain point, it's one of these things like art and drawing. If you really want to do it, you need to dive in and do it, because you can practice. Practice, 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 and it just gets better. Well, I had lots of fun with the book I've written. It took me 2.5 years almost before it really was finished. But for me, the fun, a lot of the fun, were doing the illustrations, because I didn't know that I could do that sort of thing. I had always doodled, and when I was in New Zealand, met an artist who always drew her trips in a sketchbook, because she said it really cuts down on your photo bills, and you don't get home and wonder, why did I take that picture? What is it? Because you can sketch it, and then you can write down what it is while you're there. And she said just the act of being aware of the detail really helps bring it back to you when you look at it. And this, I have learned, is so true. But while I was there then, and we went shopping, I guess we were shopping for bathing suits, and I saw a black pen and a tablet, and I thought, okay, I'll go this far. And Lois said, well, if you're going to do that, let's find you some watercolors too. So that's how I got started on the sketching, and I have just found it so much fun to even sit in my house and look at my garden in the summer and draw the flowers. Or when you're going on picnics or trips, even just field trips, it's a fun thing to do, to just sit and sketch, because it does bring a lot of awareness into your life. And of course, on all of the trips, the longer trips I've taken, I would like to do something with the other 9 foreign trips that I've taken that aren't in this hemisphere. I've been doing my granddaughter's baby books, the 2 younger girls. Their books up to 2 years old are primarily sketches and comments from Grandma, with a family tree thrown in and some of that kind of thing. And then as I've worked with them, because they're little, they're 5 and 2, I'm thinking about, oh, maybe it would be fun to see if I could do stories and picture books for children. Now, I haven't got that far yet, but I've been thinking about it, right.
Good evening, and welcome this evening. My name is Meredith McGowan, and I'm the curator here of the Heritage Room. And I'd like to welcome you to the room and to the John H. Ames reading series. And the series has been in existence for 20 years now. So we're pretty excited about that. We're here in the Jane Popgeski Heritage Room. It is a special collection, and the point of it is to preserve and promote works by and about Nebraska authors. We have about 12,000 volumes by some 3,000 authors at this point. So here it is. You're more than welcome to come and visit us during our regular public service hours. We're open on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays from 12 to 3, and on Sunday afternoons from 2 to 5. We'd also like to thank the Nebraska Literary Heritage Association, because we're only able to bring special programs like this to you through an endowment that they established through their volunteer efforts. Tonight, our reader is Shirley Maly. According to the information I have about Shirley, she's been a reader since a young age. She got her library card when she was in the 2nd grade, she tells me. And she's been a writer for a long time, too. She continued both of those interests into college when she majored in English and journalism at UNL. She's done a variety of writing over the years. She's written newsletters, feature stories, annual reports, news releases, advertising copy, and a lot more, I am sure. But her most recent book, The Love Affair with the Americas, a picture primer of travel memories that she both wrote and illustrated, is a different kind of writing. This book came out of her experiences as a Peace Corps volunteer in Uruguay from 1992 to 1995, and from her subsequent travels throughout the Western Hemisphere. We're happy to have Shirley Maly with us here. Please help me welcome her this evening.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for being here. I'm just delighted. I always think on things like this, it's like giving a party, and what if nobody comes? Because here we're not even offering refreshments. So I will start with about the book. If you haven't seen it, this is the book. It presents my awareness of the good, the beautiful, and the unique in the countries that I visited, from my observations, from my perceptions. The other thing that I realized about a book like this, or anything like that, is it's dated. Whenever you were there on that trip, that's what your perceptions, observations are. And for instance, in Uruguay, where I lived for 3 years, I left there in 1995. I went back and visited in 2000, and there were some changes. They didn't seem that major, but I went back this spring, last spring, 10 years later, and it's like, wow, have these things changed? They were good changes, they were lovely. Then, of course, one of the main things were the 12-year-olds that I had taught English to. We'd done folk dancing, just all kinds of things. They're easily reflected in my book. They were about this high. They weren't even quite as tall as I. Now, most of them are through high school for sure, through college, several of them. One of them happened to be on vacation from Spain where she had a job, and another was married with a baby. And then the 5-year-old that I had taught English to, she's now 19, I think it was. She was 5 when I started. I mean, I checked, how could she be so old? But, but it all works out, and she was getting ready to be married. So it really gives you a realization that, yes, nothing is static. Everything changes. The book also is, as Meredith pointed out, it's illustrations and narrative. And these are the illustrations. I know for those of you in the back, you can't see them very well, but I wanted to, these are the originals. And I wanted to show you how, because a lot of people ask me that, oh, do you paint as you go? And I do. These are the kind of books, sketch books that I take, little art books for watercolor paper, so I can paint on both sides. And the nice thing about them, here's Peru, is that you sketch, and I may not get them painted as I sketch. If it's color is a real pertinent thing, I may try and write down somewhere what color it was. But the thing is, you can take your notes. You can make your notes as you go. And so that way it just really becomes a nice chronological showing of the trip. And where I would come home and want to show or want to share my photos of trips with my family. And they were sort of, okay, flip through perhaps. At least with the sketchbooks, as they are, they will come, when I get home, they'll come over and say, well, where's your book? Where's your sketchbook? We want to see it. And it makes it ever so much easier and is certainly gratifying. Now, along with sketchbook, in order to do those things, this is what I carry. This is my bag of artwork. I probably should have cleaned them up, but I would have had to remix some colors. There is my little watercolor box. And then I carry Kleenex and a napkin so you have something to wet your brush. Have a black pen that's .25 line so it's thin and you can always darken it later with something bigger. And an Old Spice bottle with a nice tight lid to carry the water in. But all of this, if I have a large enough purse, all of this fits in my purse, and I just have a lot of fun with it. Also, at my age, this is nice because if people are pushing your endurance on walking or hiking, you're able to say, oh, would you mind if I sat here a moment and just sketch this beautiful whatever? And it gives you some breathing space because how can they say no? So it's been good for that. But the book does let me share my perceptions. And the other thing, I think it's possibly more important for people getting to the white-haired age, you have this sense of wanting to leave something. And I would recommend to everybody, whether it's a journal, whether it's sketches. James Thurber, if you think about it, did his own artwork, and I understand his publishers kept wanting him to use a professional artist, and he refused. He liked what he did. And I've always liked them too, because there's so much action in those little line drawings. Well, see, that's all it would take, because when you do your own sketching, it makes you that much more aware of what you're looking at. And you can leave that for other people, and even for yourself, when you maybe don't feel like traveling anymore. It's a perfect time to sit down and think about all the places you've been and all the wonderful people you have met. One of the criticisms of some of my early readers was that it was too good, that none of these places were that good. Well, I don't know exactly what they meant with good. I guess part of it, with one of them said happy. Everybody looks so happy. So I finally, when I had to redo one of the pages, I finally did put an unhappy person in it. And so if you're looking for the book and you find a person with a frown, that's me. I figured I can do that to myself. And if you look closely at that illustration, you'll know why I am frowning. But then I was able to say, no, not everybody in the book is smiling. And it's true. There is no plot. It's just quick bites, short stories, recipes, games, and watercolor collages that have captions. The message basically is that we're all alike. We're no better, no worse. We care about the same things. We care about our families. We care about our children. We care about ourselves. So doesn't it make sense that somehow we can care about being friends with one another? Because the world is full of people, and all we have to do is learn to get along with one another. I have selections within the book to read to you, to give you a flavor of the writing, and I tried to put the illustrations here, even though some of you I know can't see the detail. But the first one, because each one of these was selected because it had some meaning to me, a certain feeling. The first one I consider motivating, and this is Canada in 1971. Now see, that was before I started sketching, because I didn't begin that until New Zealand in 2001. But I was able to go back to some of my old photos when I recalled the things in the trip that I really liked and develop some collage sketches. I learned about Canada on the radio with Sergeant Preston of the Royal Mounted Police and his trusty dog King, who kept peace in the Yukon. Then there was Susanna of the Mounties, the books and the movies starring Shirley Temple. My mother introduced me to Anne of Green Gables on beautiful Prince Edward Island. So it's not surprising that these are comfortable places I wanted to visit in Canada. Books are a great way to travel and explore. New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island were my first foreign experiences. When my sister's family lived in Caribou, Maine, I visited one summer in the early 70s. New Brunswick is right across the border. We toured friendly towns along rivers and through mountain valleys. I shot slides of peaceful rural churches, lofty steeples, billowy clouds against a bright blue sky. The small, tidy cemeteries and large pines added a feeling of peace. Freshly steamed lobsters purchased on a dock for an indoor picnic rates as a major memory of family fun, even now. Then, visiting the Bay of Fundy and learning about tides was a mystical experience for a flatlander. How can that much water disappear and reappear all in a 24-hour period? Another trip, probably to me the most exhilarating, I guess is what I'm calling it, was the Virgin Islands. It was in the Virgin Islands that three of us had our cruise that we had talked about, and we were talked into doing a bareboat charter. A bareboat, if you haven't heard the expression, it's sort of like a timeshare. You rent somebody's boat, and then you go out and buy the food, and I think we had to bring our own linen, something to sleep in. I don't remember that part, but I know that we had quite a shopping spree getting our food and getting it all stowed away. And then you use the boat, and when you turn it in, you have to make sure that it's absolutely spotless and in the pristine condition that it was supposedly when we took it out. So Pat and I toyed with a cruise, meaning, of course, a big, lavish ship where one is waited on hand and foot. But our friend Roy insisted, save your money. Why not use that money and really sail? The three of us can sail wherever you want on your own bareboat charter. I'll be your captain, even do the cooking, and we'll split the costs 3 ways. So we did. After a year's research and planning, we arrived at Avery's Boathouse and picked up Bossy, a 28-foot Pearson, for a 2-week charter, towing a small boat to get to shore. Roy qualified as captain. Our crew experience was Pat's sunfish ownership and my windsurfer skill. The dock was east of a submarine base and west of an amphibious plane service. We stocked our boat, acquired our charts and orders, no night sailing, and sailed away through the main harbor, staring up at those 20-story towering cruise ships as we headed out to the open seas in Bossy. Destination, St. James Island. We relaxed on deck, Pat dozing, Roy forward. I had the wheel. Suddenly, the boat lurched to a dead stop in the water. Roy began to fall over the side, but caught himself. I tried to remember how he said to release the sails in emergencies. Pat awakened, and the sails released. The only sound was lapping water. We were out of sight of land, rising and falling with the waves. Finally, our hearts stopped pounding, and the captain stripped to his swim trunks and adjusted his ankle knife and dived overboard. "Don't leave without me," he called as he disappeared below. We tossed the lifesaver ring and waited, waited, and waited an eternity. A splash heralded the captain clambering aboard. We crew members sighed with relief. "The screw was tangled in a fish net," he said. He'd untangled it rather than cutting the net. His only problem, the boat kept hitting him on the head as it rocked up and down. We hoisted the sail as far as it would go, but that's another story. Let's see here. The next one excerpt is from a trip I took with a group, a literary tour. And being an English major, gee, I thought I knew about these authors. But I had a lot to learn. And it was in New England, and we saw the homes or the museums of 10 authors. We went through all of these places where the Revolutionary War happened. 2 artists. We saw Grandma Moses Bennington and the Norman Rockwell Museum. It was really, really mind-boggling. Emily Dickinson, Amherst, Massachusetts, was the greatest surprise for me. Independent, focused, she was a woman who did her own thing, from poetry to baking award-winning bread and gingerbread. Another surprise was Edith Wharton. She mainly lived in France. Born a Jones into old money, keep up with the Joneses. She wrote 41 novels and short stories, plus an interior decorating book, 1898, that is still used today. Her ideas are showcased in Mount Mansion, Lenox, Massachusetts. France awarded her the Legion of Honor for her war work in the 1930s. When I talk about we, a lot of times I mean Sarah Stevenson, who's a retired teacher from Lincoln. We've known each other through the Lincoln school system too, but we're also in a Spanish class together. And we kind of, because of the Spanish and because we are both divorced and single, so we could move around once our kids were gone, a lot of the travels we go on together. And so Puerto Rico is one of those, an elder hostel. Through elder hostel and our own exploration, we experienced the rainforest and Vieques, largest of Puerto Rico's 7 islands. White sand beaches, dry rainforests, mountains, plantations, farmland, small towns, and San Juan, major city, with 78 McDonald's. This small island reflects the 15th to the 21st centuries and a multitude of environments. The bioluminescent bay, La Parguera, with its magic, glowing flora and fauna, is one of my favorites. Bioluminescence is created by warm still waters and microorganisms that feed on plankton and glow when agitated. To me, it's magic. Our group toured Cornell University's operated Arecibo Observatory in the mountains, officially the National Astronomy and Ionosphere Center, with the largest radio telescope in the world and a satellite dish that's equivalent to 26 football fields. Something you can check out on the internet. Coquilles, 1-inch frogs with frog-horn voices, serenaded every evening. Our rent-a-ranger, Lewis, told us that they have low and high sound. Low is heard only by the males as a means of identifying territory, while the high sounds are a signal to come hither for females. Coquilles are unique to Puerto Rico. Now, an aside there, this, I wore my coquille pin. See, they really are tiny. They're never bigger than an inch. And then you would think they had to be huge when you hear this chorus. And in the Journal-Star, a couple weeks or maybe a month ago, I read an article from an island in Hawaii that coquilles have been imported into the island, probably with fruit shipments or whatever. And the island is now, as the mayor puts it, overrun with coquilles, and the people want them out of there, and they can't figure out a way to get rid of them. And she's spending $3 million to get rid of the coquilles. And the Puerto Ricans just, oh, they're wonderful. Well, you know, why would you want to get rid of a little coquille? So it is interesting how we look at things differently. Mexico. I've ended up having gone to Mexico 7 times when I counted it up and I was working on this book. This story, you missed Puerto Rico. I knew I would forget to do this. There's Puerto Rico. And so the next is the murderous fountain. No, it isn't. There it is. I'm sorry. Pátzcuaro has a small fountain, Fuente de los Torritos, that was accused of murder. It seems a drunken man fell off his horse and hit his head on the fountain. He died. The city fathers tried the fountain and decreed that it was guilty of murder and should be moved. Today, it stands at the corner across from Gertrudis Bocanegra Plaza. Gertrudis was a patriot in the 1810 revolution, but from a wealthy family. She was ultimately apprehended and executed by the Spanish for her support of the insurgents. Our hotel on Plaza Vasco de Quiroga was her family home in the 19th century. And this was one of the trips with Sarah. Okay, down to earth. That's right. Guatemala. When Sarah and I were in Mexico one year staying with the Benedictine sisters because we wanted to know what it was like to work with poor people. And that's what we did, was shadow them as they worked through the week. We met a woman who was there from California who went on. Her calling was to go to Guatemala and help the artisans develop markets in this country. Now, primarily in California, but some things have been sold here. But she wanted help with one of her sales catalogs, and so offered me the opportunity to live with her for free if I would come down and help her with her catalog. And her other job, the one that was sort of paying for a lot of her food and gave her a truck to drive around in, was solar ovens that are, there's a picture of one, the red thing is a solar oven, made out of wood and then has glass and has all of this aluminum foil and reflective material. So that to me was more fun than the catalog. In the middle of a cornfield near Solala, we delivered a solar oven to a family of 10 who lived in an adobe house with rooms built around a central atrium. No trees near, just corn stalks. The tiny mountain community of Volcan in the northeast needed a solar oven census. You could see Honduras from the church where we parked the truck. We hiked to the various homes to ask how they used the solar ovens At one home, I was told to take a shortcut up through the cornfield to the road. The field was so steep and the soil so soft, I literally fell up the mountain into a farmer who just laughed and laughed. He suggested a less direct path. At another home, 2 teenagers were making tortillas in the cooking hut. No chimney, and wood smoke billowed out the door and one window. They only used the solar oven for special occasions, not everyday cooking. Yeah, the ovens were lots of fun because she hated to cook. And so when she needed to do demonstrations while I was there, I did the chicken and rice casserole or the cookies or whatever her demonstration was to be. Next, Nicaragua. This one I thought was heartwarming. I had a chance to go to Nicaragua with a friend and her husband who worked with the University of León. Nebraska, UNL or UNO, has an exchange program in social work with the University of León. And what I was helping do was teach great books discussion technique to the faculty members of the English department. But we had another thing to do too, because Pius X here in Lincoln had gathered toys, Christmas toys, for these Nicaraguan children to be distributed in León through their Rotary Club. So we were taking the toys down, and though it was in March rather than December, I don't think it mattered a bit to the children. During extra moments, we bagged toys for distribution. Each bag had the family's name and ages of each child. We had to sort the toys by age groups and hope a child got a toy they liked. I'm not sure the children cared. They were thrilled to have a toy of their own. One little boy received a bus, the only item in a large plastic bag. He looked at it, touched it, ran it at the bottom of his bag, but when someone came near, he would close the bag as if to protect his gift. And I call this one uplifting. This was a Friendship Force trip in Peru. And we were there. Let's see, before Easter. We got home, I believe, in time for Easter. But we were there that week after Palm Sunday. So we were in Cusco on the Monday before Easter. This is the day when a leather statue of Christ is carried through the community from 3 to 7 p.m. The statue is black because of the aging and smoke from the candles. This is the Christ for the indigenous. For 2 hours before the procession, the cathedral is filled with beautiful, haunting voices of a Quechua choir, one of the most soulful chorale pieces I've ever heard. I teared up. At 3, the Christ is shouldered by a hand-picked team of carriers and relief carriers to parade through the city. Faithful throw money and fuchsia blossoms to the Christ. Promptly at 7 p.m., the tall cathedral doors open and the black Christ bows and tilts towards the 50,000 people gathered in the square, blessing them as it silently disappears inside for another year. And that was the procession of the Black Christ. It was really very awe-inspiring. And then, sort of my beginnings, I call it satisfying. My life in Uruguay. Peace Corps invited me to Uruguay to help teach small business. That's where the love affair began. 19 small business and environmental volunteers trained in Montevideo, once considered the most beautiful city in the world. Uruguay's capital has 1,500,000 people. After 3 months of intensive Spanish, culture, and business training, I left my family to live and work alone in a pueblo of 200 people, La Tentacion, about 60 households. My colleagues laughed. It was 30 miles from the department or state capital, 7 miles of seldom graded dirt road from the highway, bus service 3 times a week. It had a small store, Almanson, and a truck came on Tuesdays and Fridays with bread, wine, in-season fresh produce, and some notions. We had a policeman, a K-6 school, because education is mandatory and free, even university. A community center built with UNESCO funds, a tiny chapel with services once a month, and a telephone switchboard in the extra bedroom of a home where one could go to make and receive calls. I worked with 2 groups of artisans, a sewing group, women, and men and women who learned to make utensils with horn and bone. The idea was to help the women supplement family incomes by working at home. Most of the men were ranch workers, some near, some far away. It would help keep wages stabilized. Some men rode out every morning at 4 or 5 on horseback. Others went by pickup truck to places far distant and came home only on weekends. La Tentacion and its families enriched my life. To get acquainted, I taught English in my home. The advanced class of 5th and 6th graders became like a girls' club. I taught international folk dances from tapes I had, and they performed at community functions. After describing Halloween, we had a costume party. The girls bobbed for apples and feasted on brownies that they made in my oven. In turn, they taught me many things about friendships and country, and we're still in touch. Along with that, my 3 months in Montevideo were with Raquel, and I thought this is such a simple recipe, you'd all want to hear it. Raquel's marinated red peppers. I lived in Montevideo with Raquel for 3 months. Best food I had there. She was an Italian immigrant, made her own wine and raised lots of Swiss chard, the vegetable of choice in Uruguay. I love this recipe because I never had a refrigerator and could preserve peppers for pizza, beans, chicken, salads, any other things without worry. So you clean and strip about 3 sweet peppers, red peppers. Cook until tender in a half cup of vinegar, 1 cup of water, and a teaspoon of salt. When they're cool, you pack them in a jar with garlic, oregano, pepper, and red wine vinegar. Then add oil on top to keep the air out. They're really easy and they really are tasty. And then in conclusion, my love affair doesn't end. Sketching these collages deepens my pleasure in travel and the people and places in this hemisphere I've visited. The people I've met do the same things in their lives as we do in ours. Try to make a good life for themselves and their families. For me, differences don't diminish people. We have more in common than we have differences. One culture's April Fool's Day is another culture's Day of Innocence. Only the point of view and the perception differ. And I found a nice little verse from Robert Louis Stevenson. We are all travelers in the wilderness of the world, and the best we can find in our travelers is an honest friend. Thank you for being here.